All right. We've got about 20. Is about 1 more minute okay to wait?
Yeah, totally up to you.
Okay.
That's totally fine. And I was planning to try to do this in some slides in about 10 to 12 minutes, and then want to make sure we had plenty of time for discussion and questions if anybody has any.
Absolutely.
Great.
Alrighty. Well, I think we're good at the moment, so I'm going to try to get this spotlighted. All right, welcome everyone to this meeting with Senator Chris Hansen, and we are, this is a community education meeting to talk about climate issues in Colorado, and so it's really for anyone of any level of participation in the climate issue. Senator, I did want to thank you before we get started for the support you've expressed for Together Colorado's housing and show-ups legislation. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you.
I thought I'd give a quick bio. Hopefully the one I found is up to date, and then I'll invite you to start your presentation. Okay. For those of you that are meeting Senator Hansen for the first time, he represented House District 6 from 2016 to 2020. He currently represents Senate District 31 and serves as chair of the Apportions Committee and is a member of the Joint Budget Committee. During the 2017 House session in the House, Hansen continued his history of working on environmental and energy issues by sponsoring bills to protect healthcare workers from retaliation, encourage electricity storage technologies, increase the use of renewable energy, study power transmission options, increase water use efficiency, and allow homeowners to more easily invest in energy efficient improvements to their homes. Before beginning public service, Senator Hansen was Senior Director at IHS Inc., a global research and consulting firm, and has nearly 2 decades of business experience in the clean technology sector, working with renewable energy and electricity companies, as well as governments at every level to improve their operations. He also teaches energy economics and policy courses at the University of Colorado. Senator Hansen was co-chairman of the Colorado Energy Coalition. He has a PhD in economic geography from Oxford and a master's in engineering from MIT. During this time, we will listen to your presentation, and if anyone has questions, you can chat them to the host during this time, and then I'll ask questions for as much time as we have left over. So Senator Hansen, thank you again for joining us. We're so glad to have you.
All right. Well, yeah, thank you again for the invitation, and really pleased to be able to share a few thoughts with you tonight and give you a little bit of an update on the various environmental and climate change bills that we're working on this session at the Capitol. And then, of course, really looking forward to the discussion and hearing your thoughts and feedback and ideas that we should carry forward. So with that in mind, I'm just going to cover a few slides give us a chance to think about some of the big priorities this session. You know, we go into the 2021 session. Of course, our number one priority is helping Colorado recover from the COVID pandemic. I hope everyone has been able to get vaccine appointments. I think that's going to obviously make a massive difference on our recovery and keeping people healthy and safe. But of course, the climate continues to deteriorate, and we can't stop work on all the other important issues. As my dad would say, you got to walk and chew gum at the same time. So that's what we're trying to do here, and really pressing forward on making sure we can drastically reduce carbon emissions in Colorado and protect our environment. And so in 2019, we passed a law, House Bill 1261, that put into place some very clear targets for us to meet. And you can see those on this slide. And 2025 target, of about 26% reduction. That essentially represents the Paris Climate Agreement. By 2030, we are requiring that we have a 50% reduction across our economy and a 90% reduction by 2050. Now, we've got a pretty good idea of how to hit the first and the second target. The 90% target, we got a lot of work to do. And that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, is how do we get from where we are in 2021 to that 90 or 100% reduction of carbon emissions in Colorado. Now, where are we currently producing emissions? Well, this gives you a bit of a kind of augmented pie chart of where the different sectors contribute to our overall emissions. We are still putting out way too much CO2 in Colorado. The electricity generation is a big piece of that. Transportation, all the cars we drive are a big part of that. I'm going to be spending a little bit of time talking about both of those areas. But we've also got about half the total contribution from a bunch of other sectors: oil and gas, agriculture, keeping our buildings warm in the winter, our cooking at home, all of those activities contributing to CO2 emissions in Colorado. The other subcategory that I am trying to work a lot on this year is methane. Methane leaks from old coal mines, from active coal mines. It leaks from oil and gas. It leaks from the landfills and the wastewater treatment plants that we all rely on. It leaks from agriculture residues and dairies and feedlots, et cetera. So these are all the different sources of methane that we need to get much better at taking and reducing those. So a couple bills that are really trying to directly go after those sources of emissions. First is Senate Bill 161. This is a bill that will be heard in Senate committee next week. And it's really focused on methane reduction and using the biogas that we have in the state. So it establishes a clear target for the natural gas sector to reduce emissions by 5% by 2025 and 20% by 2030, and specifically calls out things like leaking coal mines and the methane sources that I just mentioned. And so we think there's a big opportunity here. The good news is we can invest in these mitigation projects, create new jobs while we are improving the environment. And I think it's going to be a really positive step forward for the state. And so we'll be hearing that bill next week. The other bill that I've been working on is a bill that just recently passed out of the Senate. Got 28 out of the 35 votes, so very bipartisan. And it's looking at modernizing the transmission grid in Colorado. Unfortunately, we are relatively cut off from our neighbors. We don't have the ability to share a lot of electricity back and forth. And what we need to do is integrate into a regional transmission organization, or RTO. So this gets a little bit technical, but this is one of these kind of things that we all take for granted, right? We go to our light switch and we flip the switch and the lights come on, and we don't even think about, where did that electricity come from? And right now we need to really improve our transmission grid so that we can integrate more wind and solar, drastically reduce carbon emissions, and do it in a way that really protects low-income customers. Because we've got to do this transition. We've got to make sure that folks who are hurt by the transition, who maybe lose their jobs because they work in a coal plant, we need to make sure we have a just transition. But we also need to make sure we're reducing emissions in the most cost-effective way that we can. And that's why I think the transmission grid is really an important piece of that overall puzzle. So Senate Bill 72 is on its way to the House, and hope to have that to the governor's desk here in just a couple weeks. And I think that will really help us in our goal of getting rid of carbon emissions from our electricity sector. The other thing that we know is going to happen is that if we do a good job of updating our grid, we know that leads to savings for customers, because we get to use the lowest cost electricity options, which in this case is wind and solar. And that is going to be about $100 million a year in savings for Colorado customers. It also means billions of dollars of new investment, which means we're going to create new jobs as we build those transmission lines. And we have some estimates that it's going to be about 75 jobs per mile of new lines. And we can meet our climate targets that we talked about at the beginning of the presentation. So there's a couple of examples of bills that I've been working on. As we think about the rest of the legislative session, we're now looking at things like beneficial electrification. I mentioned renewable natural gas and biogas, clean heat options for home buyers. The other bill that I've got going is to selectively use low emission building products. So steel, concrete, et cetera, have a lot of emissions embedded in them. You think about driving down the highway and all the tons of CO2 that were needed just to make the concrete to go into our interstates. So that's an area I think we can make a lot of progress on. Gas distribution planning and distribution and demand side management in the gas sector is something I think we badly need. I talked about transmission, I talked about the RTO, and I wanted to end on a really important topic, which is we all need to be switching to electric cars as fast as we can. And I realize, that there are some affordability issues there, which are going to improve over time. But that is one of the best ways to improve air quality and reduce emissions in the state. And so I thought I'd share with you kind of what I think is happening in the transportation sector. This is the use of gasoline cars, the red line. It's going to go down over time. I think we all know that as we switch to electric vehicles. Here's what I think is going to happen to private electric vehicles. We're going to start buying a lot more of them over the next few years. But then I think the crossover point, my best guess, is sometime late this decade. So that's kind of an exciting future for all of us. But then what I think eventually happens is we get autonomous electric vehicles, and that's the blue line on this graph. Now this graph has a lot of important implications because not only is it a climate change graph, but it also helps us think about how do we fund our infrastructure. And that's another one of the big debates at the Capitol this year is how do we pay for roads and bridges and transit and moving people, not just cars. That's what we need to focus on to be sustainable. And so lots of big changes coming. And this is a big part of our debate this year at the Colorado legislature is to try to take what we know is coming, this switch to autonomous electric vehicles, and really make sure that we have a sustainable budget and funding model for our infrastructure as a result. So those are a few highlights for you of things coming up, a couple of the bills I've been working on, and a few of the other bills that have been introduced this session. And so with that, want to make sure people know how to reach me. Please contact me anytime. Here's my state email address and my office number. Really encourage you to drop me a line anytime to share ideas or share your thoughts on different bills that we're looking at. And with that, I'm going to stop the death by PowerPoint and get to the fun part, which is getting to hear from you, your questions and comments.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful and informative. I do have a few questions just up front, and then we'll go to the questions I've received in the chat. Again, if you have questions that you would like to submit, they will submit to the host, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. Part of our potential audience for this meeting and for this video that'll be posted are people that might be beginning to be involved in climate action. And so I did want to ask you, we hear this quite a bit sometimes in our faith community settings. What do we do when we encounter someone that's skeptical about climate change? And what do we say to help engage them in the issues? What are some steps that are helpful in starting and building that conversation?
Yeah, really, really important question. I'm glad to get a chance to talk a little bit about that. And my experience is to try to make it as personal and relatable as possible. And so when I'm talking to people in my district, talking to people in Colorado, I often refer to things like snowpack and the fire season and the pine beetle kill, all of these things that we are seeing in our own backyard that are a direct result of changes in climate. And I think that really helps bring home the point in a way that, talking about melting polar ice caps or the polar bears, people care about those things, but not in the same way as what's in our own backyard. And I think people saw the massive fires last year. They see the change in our winters, the shortening of our ski seasons, the more intense heat in the summer. And people know that it's different from when they were growing up. They know it's different from how it was a few decades ago. And we're seeing the first, results of this accumulated emissions, and it's only going to accelerate. And so helping people understand the current impact, helping people understand the acceleration of this problem. It's not linear. It's not like it's going to be just a little bit worse next year. It's going to really start to take off on us, and helping to explain that urgency to people, this crisis that we're in around the climate, and that we have to act now. And we're already going to see massive impact and massive damage from climate change. The question is, are we brave enough? Are we smart enough to work fast enough to make the impacts as low as possible, even with the damage we've already done? And so that's kind of how I like to talk about it with people in the district.
I think you touched on one thing that I hear a lot is that we are running out of time, that we're up against the edge. And if we don't see changes immediately, it's pointless. How does that urgency, and you've touched on that a little already, but how does that urgency work into and motivate you in the work that you're doing? And how do we, if people are new and are just getting involved in climate action, what are the things that they can do that will have the most impact since time is short?
Well, yeah, the first part of that question, I think for me, this is the reason I quit my job and ran for public office. I mean, this is the issue that I wanted to see if I could, add some of my experience and background to help solve some of these difficult puzzles. And it's why I started knocking doors and left my job 5 years ago. My kids are still confused about this choice, but here we are. And at the same time, I try to share with my two sons, like, hey, I'm doing this for you and for your entire generation, because we have to have that urgency. And I think I do 5, 6, 7 climate bills a year. I try to support my colleagues, other climate bills that are being brought forward, because we have to use every single tool in the toolkit, from small things, reducing food waste, to big things like I'm never going to buy an internal combustion car again, on the personal level, to solar panels on my roof, to electrifying things in my house instead of using fossil fuels. Like, they're all the things we can do in our daily lives. But we've also got to take on the systemic issues like the transmission grid, setting clear targets for emission reductions in every single sector of the economy. And we need both local action, personal action, and systemic change. And if we all are working together to do that rapidly, we just might avoid cataclysm, maybe just. But it's so urgent that we pull every lever we can get our hands on.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. I know that many people in activist circles were a lot discouraged recently with the whistleblower report that came out about the CDPHE. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can. I mean, there's several follow-up actions happening right now and investigating that whistleblower complaint. I actually received an early version of that information in 2019 as a kind of a run-up to the public release of the whistleblower complaint, wanting to make sure that a public official had it so that there was clear whistleblower protection as they were preparing that information. I've been dismayed about the charges, about the accusations that have been brought forward, and there's going to be very vigorous investigation. And I think you're going to see some changes, in the way we budget and prioritize things at the department as a result. And so I'm really, I'm glad we live in Colorado where we have clear whistleblower protections so that we can have this kind of corrective mechanism. This is a really important, moment of accountability for that department. And I think hopefully it demonstrates that our whistleblower laws are working.
And what are the ways that we can help support the uncovering of this? Should we be calling our senators and representatives? Are there any actions we can take to help with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I definitely would communicate with your own representatives and senators. Your concern about it, that you're aware of it, that you want the legislature to take the results of the investigation and act immediately to solve the problems that have been raised. Nothing replaces that kind of outreach from your own district. And obviously we hear from advocates and lobbyists and different interest groups all the time, but there is nothing better than hearing from your own constituents. And so really encourage people to get to know your rep, and your senators, have coffee with them as soon as it's safe to do so, and get to know them over time, because those are the meetings I enjoy so much more than some of the other advocates and professional groups. Obviously want to hear from them too. That's an important part of the process, but nothing better than hearing from constituents.
Yeah. Someone did just ask, do you know if there will be public hearings on this complaint, the whistleblower complaint?
I don't know if that is the next step in the process.
Okay.
There certainly is always time for public comment on the legislative side of this. I am guessing we will probably be doing some legislative audit work on this that will result in an additional set of reports or report. And there's always the public space for comment at the legislative side, but I'm not sure if there's a public comment on the complaint itself at the department.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question here. Do you think that a progressive, for example, income-based utility rate structure is a useful way to get energy equity? If so, how can we get that done?
Yeah, I've been really focused on, I'm doing a bill this year that I didn't mention in the presentation on low income utility assistance. It's with Representative Kennedy. He's got it in the House right now. And it's basically setting up a structure where we would drastically, drastic might not be the right word, but significantly expand our ability to help low income families with their utility bills, and at the same time help people upgrade their homes so they're more energy efficient. Right? It's not just a matter of, hey, we'll help you cover your gas bill. Instead, let's get insulation and better windows and all those things so you don't have to burn as much gas in the first place. So we've got a bill that would take that resource from about 10 million a year up to about 30 million a year. There's huge need for that right now. And that is a big priority for us to get past this session.
All right. One question that comes up quite a bit in our discussions at Together Colorado is the concept of public banking and how that might help deal with climate issues. Just want to see how you feel about that. Yeah,
so public banking has many different aspects to it. One that I think is very ripe for change is creating what is often referred to as a green bank. In this case, it's called the Colorado Climate, I'm trying to remember the acronym now, CCEF. I'm sponsor of the bill. I should be able to remember the acronym. The Colorado Clean Energy Fund. Thank you, Colorado Clean Energy Fund. We are looking at using some stimulus dollars to get that off the ground. And I really see this as a chance to not only invest in climate change projects, things that will reduce emissions, but it's a great way to get a revolving loan fund going. I kind of liken it to putting a snowball at the top of the mountain. And once you get it going, it just picks up more and more snow because the loans, of course, pay back. We're going to invest in projects that have a climate and financial return. And so in a sense, we are kind of using public banking concepts for this particular fund. Right now, we're planning to put $30 million into that. We may try to do a bit more if we can afford it to get that snowball started. And that will be very focused on projects that reduce emissions.
Right. From the local in Colorado, I've got a couple questions on federal issues. In general, how are you feeling about the new administration and the stand that they're taking on climate issues? And then also I had a specific question about the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act, and if that's something that you would support.
All right. So my perception right now of the Biden administration's climate team and the energy team is extremely positive. I think they are taking the right steps right out of the gate. I think they're going after the places with a lot of leverage, meaning a lot of ability to move the needle quickly. One of the areas that they're working on actually is integration of the national grid, which I'm pushing here in Colorado and would love to see more of that at the federal level too, because it has such huge dividends for our climate work. They're and of course, getting back into the Paris Agreement, but trying to go rapidly beyond what we've promised in that now fairly old agreement. But they've got a lot of catching up to do. We've had 4 years of not only inaction, but regression on climate issues. And the Biden team is having to really quickly, turn the ship. On the second part of the question, I am not intimately familiar with that federal bill. Would love to know the bill number and look it up and learn more about it. But I'm not sure I know enough about that legislation to be able to comment.
All right. I do have that information, and I can email Jesse, and then I can get back to the person that asked that question.
Yeah, thank you.
I know that we are short on time. I thought maybe I'd ask you a kind of lighthearted question. I saw in your bio that you support Central City Opera. I was wondering if you think about how the arts and entertainment can help us tackle the climate crisis.
Wow, that is a wonderful question. That is the first time in my entire life I have been asked that question. I love it. Yeah, I am a long-time supporter of the arts in their many forms, and had a chance to be on the board of Central City Opera for a few years. If you can imagine this, I was in high school show choir and did high school musicals, and love musical theater so much, and just jumped at the chance to help out an arts organization when I was asked to join. And I think the arts in Colorado is something we really punch above our weight, so to speak. Obviously, the COVID pandemic has put massive pressure on all of our cultural institutions, and I think that's something we're going to have to all pitch in to rebuild our cultural gifts and our cultural institutions in the state. How does it relate to climate change? Well, I guess, I think about engaged citizens and how the arts inspire us to think differently about tough problems. And I think that's probably where the connection for me comes from. Being inspired by a play or a musical or a new piece of art, visual or otherwise, helps me to kind of remember my place and my responsibility, my civic engagement, and look at problems in a fresh way. And I think hopefully the art is doing that for all of us to help it re-inspire us, reinvigorate us in that work. And so that is something we've got to lovingly protect and shepherd, I think, in Colorado.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, I know you've got a meeting to get to, so I want to thank you so much for joining us. We'd love to host you again if you'd like to have another discussion like this. And thank you so much for the work you're doing in our state to work on the climate crisis.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me. You did a great job moderating, Janelle. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right. See everybody soon.
For all of you listening, if you, I have your questions, and I will take a copy of the chat and send those to the senator. If you would like to receive an answer to your question, you can email me at, I'll type it in the chat, but it's JANEL at Brew Theology, BREW theology.org. And I will match up your questions with the answers when I get them. If you have any other questions for me or any questions about Together Colorado, please reach out and let us know, and we'll be happy to answer them. Thank you so much for coming and being part of this discussion.